Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Smith, and I'm the CEO and founder of Independent Authors Book Experience. And I would like to welcome you to the first edition of The Author Speaks for 2021. We're excited to have you. We have an awesome lineup for you today. We have two wonderful authors that we're going to present. Today's topic or today's genre will be self-help. But before I get into that, I just want to acknowledge what an amazing day this has been. As you can see, I'm dressed in my pearls and I'm celebrating Inauguration Day with everybody else that are in and around the United States, if not the whole world. So I want to say congratulations to President Biden and Vice President Harris on their inauguration. I wish them all the best. I wish them much success, and we pray that all will be well with the country and we can begin to heal. I feel like today was, um, um, we ripped the band-aid off and we can start to heal. So I wish us all the best as we, go through the next 4 years. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first guest, and we will bring on Mr. Casey Bell. And Casey has been a busy beaver. He has 22 books in total and has doesn't show any signs of slowing down. So we want to just bring on Mr. Casey Bell.
Hello. Hi.
Welcome. Hi, Casey. How are you doing?
I am doing well. I am proud and happy and honored to be here with you on this evening.
Excellent. And can you tell us where you're from, Casey?
I am in New Jersey right now, South Side, not far from Atlantic City.
Okay. Nice. Excellent. And we want to bring on our next guest, and this is Mr. Richard Stone. And Richard is a nationally recognized speaker on the power of storytelling and its applications in business, healthcare, and education. And Richard is coming to us all the way from, I'll let him tell you where.
Atlanta, Georgia.
So all right. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yes. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been working with story for almost over 30 years now, and probably longer than that if I look at some of the other things I've done in my life. And I've been exploring how to use story in an applied way to help us live more fulfilled lives and to be more effective in everything we do, whether it's personally or professionally. So that's been kind of a focus of my life and my life's work.
Oh, wonderful. And that kind of leads us into Mr. Casey Bell, because Casey, I want for you to tell us a little bit about yourself as well, because I think I cut you off when you were talking, so I apologize. So can you just give us a little bit of information about who you are and tell us about your book?
Sure. I am as I always say, first, a proud uncle of 6 princes and 5 princesses. That's the first thing that makes me happy. I'm also a multi-genre creator, books, plays, poems, and art, visual art as well. And my book, 4 Keys to Success, helps people to return to their original selves.
That's interesting. And I just want to let everybody know this, if I hadn't said it before, this month we're focusing on self-help. And, I think this is so important for this month, not just this month, but at this time. I think we need a lot of self-care as individuals. It's we've been locked down for too long with the pandemic. And I think the books that you have written or things that you will talk to us today about will kind of help us to care for ourselves. So I'm very curious to hear about your 4 keys to success, Casey. And Richard, just tell us a little bit about what your book has to offer in terms of self-help.
Well, the book's title is Story Intelligence. And the premise of the book is that there are 7 powers of story. and that each of us must develop a mastery of those powers to be effective in our lives. But they can also be the keys to really unlocking possibilities for us. So what we've tried to lay out in the book are not just the ideas behind the 7 powers of story, but also practical ways people can use the power of story in their life, whether it's transforming difficulties in their personal life, healing wounds and divisions. I think that's something that, that we've been living with for 4 years now in our country. So how do we begin to use story as a powerful elixir to actually shift that conversation and to envision a better future? And story is really integral to all of that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny that you speak when you talk and you say the keys, because I think your book is Story Intelligent and Casey's book is the 4 keys. So I think you guys are on the same path in what it is that you need to really get yourself in that frame of mind to better yourself. So can you give us an idea of what some of the keys are, Casey?
So the first key, the most important key is, as I said, returning to yourself. When you're born into systems. So the first system is the home system. And sometimes parents want what's best for you, but sometimes it's not what's best for you. So you may want to grow up to be a firefighter, but they say, no, go to college and become a doctor instead. And so we change who we are for our parents. And then we get into the school system. And if they don't understand how to educate us correctly, then they throw titles on us: ADHD, autistic, you're slow, you're remedial, you're this. And then we believe it and we take that on as our identity. And then if we're in some type of church, synagogue or temple, they throw things on us of what we should be, what we shouldn't do, what we should wear, what we shouldn't wear. If you follow the astrology, if you're Gemini, this is how you're supposed to be. If you're an Aquarius, this is how you're supposed to be. And we forget that the one thing none of us have in common are our fingerprints. And our fingerprints is who we really are. We're unique, we're individuals. And we're just because one person, we're all people, like all birds are birds, but a penguin is no less of a bird because it swims and doesn't fly, doesn't have feathers. It's still a bird. And we have this tendency to become who we're not, to please people and to not offend people so that they're pleased with us instead of us just being who we are. And so the first key is learning how to understand the 5 factors of your life. They've been with you your entire life. And it's to this day, police and doctors still use them to identify victims, suspects, or witnesses. And they know for sure you were the only person in that room according to these your fingerprint, your feet prints. And believe it or not, your ear has its own print, unique from anyone else's. So if you lean your ear against on a window and the police see it, they can tell it was you and no one else. And so there are things in your life purposely to let you know that you're unique and you don't have to be like everyone else. You're not supposed to be like everyone else. And unfortunately, we choose to conform to people so they're happy with us instead of us being who we are. So that's the first key, is learning how to go back to who you originally were.
Yeah, that's very important. Really knowing who you are. And I think sometimes it's difficult though, wouldn't you say that, to go back to who you are? I mean,
it's
do you
difficult.
know who you are?
Yeah, well, the first step is to remember that one thing you enjoyed doing as a child that someone told you shouldn't do. Because you're a boy, you shouldn't do that. Because you're Black, you shouldn't do that. Because you're a woman, you shouldn't do that. And lots of times, or the school system. For me, my story is I was writing my entire life. From the day I was 5 till now, I've been writing my whole life. But my English scores told me I'm not a writer. So I believe that. And I was writing my whole life, but I didn't write and publish because the school system indirectly told me I'm not a writer. And so the one thing you can remember doing at 4 and 5 that you enjoyed doing the most, but you stopped because of someone told you you're not supposed to be doing that, that is the first way to first go back to who you are. And then the second thing is you have to learn how to get over yourself and to get over people, because we're brought up to don't talk back, don't disrespect, Don't question God. Don't question the pastor. Don't question the teacher. Everything we tell you is what it is. Shut up and listen. And so we're afraid to question because we were told don't do that. Even when we know something is wrong, we'll keep doing what's wrong because we don't want to offend people who told us you're disrespecting that person because you're doing what we told you not to do. And so it is difficult, but that's what courage and bravery is about, doing what's difficult.
Yeah, yeah. What's your take, Richard? What is your...
Well, I share a lot of what Casey is talking about. I talk about it a little differently, but I think it's essentially the same idea, is that I think we come into life with a calling, and that often is kind of gets buried, and it gets buried by, we're born into a story. So if we talk about it from the standpoint of story, is that there's already a story going on in our family when we're born, and we're born into that story. And as Casey described it, we often are certain attributes are attributed to us, or we're told we can't do certain things, or that's not what boys do, or whatever messages we get. That often what it does is it buries what that deep calling is. And so I think one of the tasks for us as adults is to rediscover that. And there's a wonderful writer, Sam Keen, and he says that the word author and authority have a lot in common. So if we figure out who's authoring our story, is it our parents? Is it society? Is it our peers? And once we can get clearer that maybe we have adopted stories that really aren't authentic for us.
Right.
And so, what Casey was describing, that is one way, is how do we go back and begin to rediscover what's essential for us? And then once we figure that out, sometimes it might be we had things we enjoy doing, like writing for Casey. He's been writing his whole life, and it's definitely that this was a calling for you, Casey. You were called to be a writer, and people were giving you different messages, and thank God you didn't listen to those messages. Eventually you said that's not true. But sometimes callings are not always synonymous with our vocations. So someone might be called to be a communicator, but there might be many avenues that one could do that. It might be through writing, it might be through speaking, it might be being a storyteller or a performer. So sometimes as an adult, we have this, it's like a spark, and we have to figure out what its expression needs to be in our life. And that becomes, I think, the life journey for us.
Yeah, that's very important. And I think especially now, I think the whole process of COVID has given a lot of people pause to really stop and reassess themselves and see what was important. Who am I? What is my purpose? What is it am I supposed to do? I've been working at this job. I've been doing this. And like you said, you kind of fall into something. You fall into a story. You fall into, this is what I was supposed to be doing. And now you have a minute where you can actually stop and think. And you're like, why am I doing this again? Why am I here? And you start to question yourself. And I think that's what you're both referring to, is that going back to that, I always wanted to do X. I always wanted to do Y. And I saw a post on Facebook earlier this week. Oh, it's Wednesday. It feels like it's forever already. And it said, I know it's flying by. The post said, if you could have anything that you don't have now, any skill, what would it be? Type of thing. So it's like, kind of, if you could wake up and snap your fingers like Dorothy, click your heels and you'd get somewhere, what would it be? And, I had to stop and think, like, what would that thing be? And I think, in terms of self-help, I think we need to take a step back and say, what is it that I want to do with myself? What is it that's going to give me joy? Because that's very important, because a lot of people do things and they don't get joy. So that's very important. And I want to tell the listeners, if you have questions for Casey or Richard, please drop it in the chat. They're willing and ready to take questions from you. And a question for both of you, or either one of you. What we know what's your message, but what was your inspiration for writing? I think Casey mentioned it. What was your inspiration for really writing this book and putting it on paper? Because you know, what was that drew you to putting your words on paper?
Well, for me, I actually started out, it was actually a Sunday school lesson that I did. And it was one of the church members who said you should put it into a book. And my response was, well, I don't think I can do that, only because I had demonstrations and I had them drawing. Because what I wanted to show people was that when you, even now with the whole Trump and everything and people hating each other because of skin color, I had everyone draw their hand along with their fingerprints. Mm-hmm. And then once, I only gave them, I think, a minute to do it. And then I said, don't be specific. Obviously, you can't. There's too many lines there. And then I said, now pass your drawing around and look at everyone else's print. And my question was, are your prints different? And the first advice, yes. I said, is there anything wrong with your prints because it's different? No. Is there anything wrong with someone else's print because they're different? No. And I said, that's why we have so many problems, because we're trying to identify ourselves with our skin color, our gender, our religion, our sexuality, instead of who we are, our fingerprint. Again, when police, if you're not in the system and the police pull your print at a scene, they don't know your height, your weight, your age, your gender. They don't know where you were born. They know nothing about you. The only thing they know for sure is you were in that room at some point in time. And so I did this demonstration, and when someone said, put it in the book, my thing was, I want to teach it to you, to teach students, to teach children. That was my goal, was me teach this and then you teach it to people. Mm-hmm. And so about a month maybe later, I said, okay, maybe I can find a way to put it in a book. And that was the inspiration.
Cool. Okay. That's very cool. I love that idea, Casey. That's terrific. For me, it was maybe not quite as a stroke of inspiration like that, but I was sitting with my writing partner, Scott Livengood, who we've been working on developing programs to help people unlock their deeper calling. And over dinner one night, I just was musing with him. I said, you know, it seems that story cuts across so many dimensions and domains of our lives. What would be the powers of story? And I think it was on a napkin, we began sort of thinking about that. You know, it would be this, it would be that. And we kind of filed it away. And about 2 years ago or so, I said, I think we need to write about this. And so I've done most of the heavy lifting on the book writing. And as I was developing it, it was really clear that there were 7 powers of story. And the first is to transport us. Stories take us someplace else, to another time. They can take us to the future. They can take us to the past. They can take us to a fictional world. They can take us to another planet. And that is so fundamental with story. And the other part of that is that I think story has always been essential to play. Humans have, we've used stories to teach. And you can go back, you can find cave drawings, and people were already, it was like the early PowerPoint. They were probably bringing children in, and they were teaching them about how to hunt a woolly mammoth or how to defend the tribe. And they became the early ways of teaching. But I think stories were also the ways people entertained themselves on cold nights around the fire as they shared stories about remarkable things that had occurred. And some of them were, the myths about how the world was created. So that became the diving in point for us as we began to elucidate what were the powers of story. And from there, it was pretty simple that we use stories to communicate. We use stories to enable learning. I've had a Native American teacher, Paula Underwood, and she came from the Oneida tradition, and she didn't believe we could really teach anybody anything. In fact, they didn't have a word for teach in the Oneida tongue, but they did have about 32 words to describe learning. And so at best, you could say that their description would be an enabler of learning, would be a teacher, someone who could enable us to learn. And they use stories to do that. I think we use stories to create meaning in our lives. And they're really a source of discovery for who are we and how do we create a meaningful, purposeful life. Um, and then to transform, how do we take difficult situations, difficult events in our life, and how do we use story to take that pain and that difficulty and turn it into a gem? And then we can use stories to unite us, to bring us together, and then finally to envision the future. I think storytelling is more about the future than the past. It's about a tool for planning and anticipating and simulating what the future could be as we walk into the future, so that we're not walking in blind. So that was the beginning for me.
Okay, and that's pretty interesting, because when you think of a story, and I like when you say, the story takes you, because I'm an avid reader. I've been reading since I've learned how to read, and I just love different genres of books, and I have learned so many different things about so many different places because I've read it in a book. And this is, I say to people, if you can travel, read. It will take you somewhere, and you're going to learn so much. And that's a very, very, I encourage people to read all the time. I tell my children, anybody I can tell, I say, read a book. Every time they tell me they're bored, I'm like, go read a book. You'll learn something. But, the thing with writing the story, one thing people, I think they get locked and forget, is that you can't rewrite your story, but you can change the narrative going forward. And that is something that we have to be aware of, that you can change the remainder of your story. Your story doesn't have to be what someone else said it's supposed to be.
Well,
Like
actually,
you were saying,
actually, Renee, I would say that you can rewrite your story. Is that the past is just a story that we tell about events, and it's one interpretation. So what happens is, things happen, and in a sense, we make up a story to explain it, to help us understand it or to make sense of it. But sometimes that story omits many things. I mean, if you ever talk to a couple siblings, you get together after you haven't seen each other in a while, and you're reminiscing about something that happened when you were kids, and you say, you remember when Dad did such and such, and the other sibling goes, that's not what happened, and
yeah,
and they have a whole different story about that same event because they had a different point of view. They also had different assumptions they had. So we come to every moment with bringing with us our own filters. And out of that, we interpret events in certain ways. And sometimes those interpretations don't serve us. So we literally can go back and revise the story. We can go, oh, maybe that story about that event in the past doesn't serve me anymore. It's open to revision. And so I think that's the way we heal things. Is often people get stuck in a story about the way things were, and by revising that story, they can free themselves in the present and allow themselves to move into the future without the burden of that story or what they've been kind of schlepping along through their life.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept as far as changing the narrative. I think people do change the narrative to suit your purposes, but it doesn't change what happened. It only changes the narrative. If you really think about it, it doesn't change what actually happened. It changes how you feel about the situation. If you think.
But the question is what happened. So at any one moment, there are 40 million data points that we could tie into, but our brains are only capable of processing maybe a few hundred a second.
Wow.
So always filtering out and making decisions what to attend to and what not to attend to. So the notion that our memory is what happened is also open to interpretation. And there's a lot of research on this, is that often people they don't perceive what happened accurately. There's lots of studies that will demonstrate that clearly, is that the story we have about that event has one little slice of kind of data, and other people who were there going, well, that's not the way I saw it, and suddenly there's other points of view. So it's an interesting question about what's the past,
Yeah. I guess when you look at the storybooks, you different books and different even if you people have get different things from different situations or different events. So I do agree with what you're saying as far as that aspect of it. And you mentioned research. Did you have to do research for your books? What kind of research did you do, Casey? Is it something that how did you kind of knew certain things, but did you do any research for your book to help to guide the reader in the 4 keys to success?
Well, the first key mentions the 5 factors in your life that are unique, which I saw on social media. And yes, I did do research to make sure it was true. Mm-hmm. And I did find out, like I said, and the funny thing is, a few of those factors I've seen on television where police shows where, like I said, police use these factors to your fingerprints, your toe prints, hands and feet, and then your ears are unique, and then your mouth is unique, your teeth, your lips, and your tongue. Your lips and your tongue also have their own unique print, which means if you have lipstick on and you kiss something or you put your lips on something, police know it was you and no one else. And then your irises are also unique. So I did, in a sense, did research just to make sure that was true. Mm-hmm. And then the other keys, yes, the third key talks about, because we always talk about crab in the bucket mentality, but we never talk about the crab by the sea mentality because their mentalities are completely different from one another. And crabs are not supposed to be in a bucket because their job is to clean the seas, oceans, and lakes. They're not supposed to be eaten. And so the crab who's free to clean the seas, ocean, and lakes has a different mentality than those who are in a bucket. And so I had to do research on what exactly crabs do. And so, yes, I did do some research.
I've never heard about the crab by the sea. I've always heard about the crab in the bucket. So I'm interested to read 4 Keys to Success to hear about their story, because that is a very interesting concept, because that is not their purpose. Their purpose is not, they're climbing out of the bucket so that they can go back to the sea to do what they're supposed to do, So I do need to check that out. That's a very interesting point you make there. Richard, what about you? You mentioned research, and I can imagine that you did some research for your book as well.
I'm a reader like yourself, Renee, and I've been, as I was diving in to develop the book, I wanted to see what are other people saying about this. I've read a lot about it, through the years, and I've written a couple other books on stories. So I spent a lot of time looking at what other people were thinking and doing, and then also looking at some real scientific research that there's a whole new body of research that's coming out over the last 10 or 15 years with fMRIs and looking at the brain and when people are hearing stories or telling stories and what happens with the synchronization between the teller and the listener and all the listeners. There's some really interesting things with synchronization or that goes on. So I spent a lot of time looking at that stuff, and then looking at how in the book, I didn't want this to be an academic book. I wanted it to be something that was accessible to the general reader. So, but how can I tell the story of some of this research in a way that it didn't sound like an academic paper, but sounded like a story and kind of was part of the flow of the story. So I tried to weave a lot of that in where I felt it was useful, because I think some of it's quite interesting and illuminating.
Okay. Along with your research, what would you say was the hardest part? Because it's something that to me, as I'm listening to both of you, it sounds like something you're very passionate about. But what was the hardest part about writing this particular book?
For me, it was knowing when it was done, because I felt like, I think that was the main reason why I didn't even want to write. Because even when I thought about writing it, I thought, but when do I stop it? When is it done? Because we get anytime you do a self-help, you're thinking to help people all the way through their journey, but self-help actually is supposed to just start your journey. It's not supposed to help your journey. And I had to realize it was okay to stop writing the book. And the beginning section of the book wasn't originally a part of the book. But I felt like, wait, I got to add this part too. I got to add this part too. When I got to the last part, I said, I feel like there's a lot more to go. And I said, well, there probably is, but everyone has a different journey. And all I can do is start them on the journey. And then the rest they're going to have to learn on the way on that journey. And so knowing when to stop was the difficult part.
You know, that's interesting, Casey, because I think for any artist or writer, that's always the question, right? You know, when's the painting done? When's the book done? I in a sort of another part of my life, I went to study painting in Chicago at the Art Institute back in my 20s. And I was in a life drawing class, and I was there doing a drawing. And toward the end of the class, the teacher came up and kind of engaged me. We started talking. And then the bell rang, and he says, you know why I came to talk? I thought he was just interested in me, you know. So he says, you know why I was talking to you? And I said, well, I thought, you thought you wanted to find out who I was. And I said, no. If you had put one more line on that drawing, you would have ruined it. So knowing when to stop is I agree with Casey, is a hard thing. I think the difficult thing for me is that my first draft was probably close to 500 pages long.
Oh wow!
Look, this is a real. This is getting into 3 volumes or something, and so the hard part was deciding what to cut out. And so I ended up, getting got kind of brutal, got my knife and started cutting sections out, and didn't put them away. I didn't throw them in the trash. I kept them, and in fact have repurposed those for blogs. And I've got, I think, 20 or 30 blogs on the website now.
Oh wow!
More to come. So knowing what to pull out is, I think, one of the challenging things, is not just knowing when to stop, but what needs to be included and what's not essential. And thinking of it through the eyes of the reader. What is this going to be interesting to the reader? And maybe this is not essential. And so that was the challenge for me, was to really start paring back. And still, the book, I think, is a little long, but we just, that's one of the things you just have to decide what's essential and what needs to be left out.
Okay, I think we have a question here for you, Richard, from the audience. See if I can get it up here.
It was up there for a second. It just disappeared.
Oh, okay.
There it is. There. Do you consider the environment of the listener in processing information? I think we as writers have to always be asking ourselves, who's the audience, and what's their background, and how would they be reading this? It's so hard, I think, as a writer, to get out of your own head, and there are things that you enjoy, or that you perhaps like, and that you think are interesting. But how's the reader going to engage with this? Is this going to be something that they're going to go, oh, that was terrific, I want more? Or is it something that's going to bog them down? So I think that you have to think about your audience continually. And it's useful, it's so hard to see it yourself. So it's useful early on, and maybe after the first or second draft, is to get somebody who's willing to read it. My wife is a good editor. I'll give her stuff, and she'll go, she would mark it up. I don't get this. What are you trying to say here? And so you have to be a little humble and go, well, maybe that's not so good. And sometimes we fall in love with our words, right? We think that
yes.
It's so wonderful, and then you have somebody who kind of goes, "This is crap." I didn't get any of this. And that'll kind of make you have to go, okay, so I need to go back to the drawing board and see if I can redo this in a way that makes it more accessible. So I think that's a challenge for any writer.
Yeah, and the thing is to be able to accept the honesty. Because that's huge, because a lot of the times this is like your baby. So you get this where, what? You don't like it? Really? No. And you want to yank it out of their hands, but you have to these are your readers. This is someone who's going to look at your work and potentially say, or someone else, and have the same kind of vision or thought or idea about your work. So you want to make sure it's cohesive and it really gets across the point that you have. And I have another statement here. Let me see if I can get it up. And it says, and I think this is regarding Casey's statement. Thanks for broaching the crab by the sea concept. She said she only learned about it in her adult years. Have always known the barrel perspective though. And I think really that's really the only one that we know or really heard of. And she's heard it in her adult years, but I'm just hearing it today, January 20th, 2021. So thank you, Casey. I really have to delve into that and see, get a little bit more information on that, because that's really an interesting point. So as we go on, because we, in terms of your writing, what is it that motivates you to write? Because we've been talking about the book, but we want to get into the whole aspect of you as a writer. Like, what motivates you to write? For those people who are listening, who have a desire to write or, want to write, what's your thing?
I hate to say this because it may sound cliche, but it's who I am. So it's like, what motivates an eagle to fly, or what motivates a penguin to swim? What motivates a cat to meow? That's what they were designed to do. And whatever you're designed to do, 9 times out of 10, you don't need motivation, because that's what you were created to do. So I write simply because I will say I've been writing before. I guess you can say my eyes were open, but my first year in college, when I found out a lot of the things they taught in high school weren't necessarily true, that's when I began researching a lot of things. And I began to realize we were just miseducated. And at first, I kept it to myself. And I was like, oh, they can find out on their own, just like I did. But when I began to just, like when I was in church, sometimes I would question things just to see if anyone else would question. See, yeah, I don't understand why that is. Lots of times I was afraid they might be offended, because, once somebody gets used to something, they don't want anyone to. But lots of times people will laugh and they would go, oh, right. Something as simple as, because we have a tendency, especially in America, just to repeat what we see people doing, but we never stop and ask, well, what is the purpose of that? And so one of the simplest things I would ask is, what's the purpose of in a wedding, the ring bearer? Because he never carries the rings. It's always the maid of honor and the best man. And 9 times out of 10, he's usually the one who doesn't want to actually be there. So he's kicking and screaming. And it's like, well, what is the purpose of this? If he's not carrying the rings, why do we need him? And even though it was a child tuxedos still are not cheap. So why are we doing this? And so I just began to question things. And I began to realize everyone would stop and go, oh, I don't know. And that's when I said, well, maybe I should start writing for those who are interested in questioning their lifestyle, because not everyone wants their lifestyle questioned. So I figured if I write it, then those who are willing to start questioning their lifestyle can get it for themselves. One of the things I say, because a lot of people say you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And I say, well, I'm the person I'm not even going to take you to the water. I'm going to give you the address and the MapQuest website, and you're going to figure it out on your own. Because I don't want to waste my time taking you to the water, because that's time I could have used for something else, and you don't drink. So purpose of writing is to give people the instructions, and if they want it, then hey. And in this way, I'm not wasting my time with people who just don't want it.
I get you.
Yeah. Writing for me, it's interesting, because I think there's different kinds of writing I've done through my life. Some of it's nonfiction, like Story Intelligence. So, there is a certain kind of digging into a topic and see if we can make sense of something for the reader that they don't know or don't understand, or that can illuminate something in their life. Writing's also emanated for me, some of the fictional work that I've written usually is through something inspiring. Something happens, or a story that I heard years and years ago. A rabbi that I know told me a story about a Jewish mystic who lived in the 1700s, the Baal Shem Tov. And that story rattled around in my head for 25 years. I kept thinking about that story, and I started seeing that story as a context for a bigger story that's a screenplay. And I finally decided, I've got to sit down and do this. And, it was a big project. So there's a lot of inertia not to do it. I had other things going on in my life, and I had to make a commitment to myself to sit down and do it. But once I started doing it, it unfolded, and, it evolved, and it was a pretty easy thing to do from that standpoint. So I think for some of us, we have a muse, somebody, there's this voice, or there's this drive to express something. And that's what's happened in my life, is often ideas come to me, or something hits me over the head, and suddenly it's an inspiration for a story. And, so I was driving one day in Orlando, Florida, where I used to live. And I came to a stop, and there was a huge a clump of pampas grass there in the median. And I was looking at that pampas grass while waiting for the light to turn green. And I suddenly imagined that it was the hair of a creature living underneath the earth. All we were seeing is the top of their head with the hair. And that was an idea for a book that became The Kingdom of Nowt, which was a children's novel I wrote. So I think that we have to be open to moments of inspiration, and be willing to go, oh, that's a neat idea, and be willing then to follow the idea. So what would happen? Is always my favorite question is, what if? What if there were creatures who lived under the earth? And that leads you down a whole rabbit hole, and so I think that's the real question for all of us who are writers, is what inspires us, what gets you. And then there is a lot of perspiration. They always say, it's maybe 10% inspiration and about 90% perspiration, because writing is rewriting, and there's a lot of work involved with it. Yes.
A lot of editing, going back, I think even for myself as a writer, I think I have three goals that when I write that I want to do. I want to educate, I want to inform, and I want to inspire. As I write in the children's book genre, and I want to make sure that my story, I give you a message. I want when you read the story, you enjoy the story, but I want you to get a message from it. And then I want to leave you with an action item. Like, there's something here. What can I do? Is it to improve myself? Is it to help the homeless? Is it to help other people? Is it to help myself? What can I change within myself to make a difference? So those are the things that, gives me, as a writer, those are the points that I look for. And those are the things I like you said, you see inspiration all around, and you're inspired. A tuft of grass, or, children playing, you're inspired, and which is a good thing. And going into that, for those people, we just talked about, what motivates you as a writer, but what kind of advice would you give aspiring writers? Someone who said, I always want to write that book, but, they keep hanging back. It's like, what's stopping you? Why aren't you doing it? What kind of advice would you give an aspiring writer who is kind of hanging back, and not just writing, but publishing? Because a lot of people have tons of books and notebooks of written work, but what's stopping you? What advice would you give to a writer to get them to get into that published phase?
Well, the first two keys of my book talk about being proud of your uniqueness. And I think that's the main reason why people don't publish, because they think about all of the other writers and the Stephen Kings and the this and that. And they say, well, I'm no Stephen King. I'm not as good as this person. And so they start comparing themselves. And that's the first thing that makes them go, I can't do this because I won't be as good. And so once you realize you're not supposed to compare yourself, then that'll really get you to start writing and to start publishing. The second advice I would give is, I call it the 3 R's: reading, researching, and restudying, because one of the things I learned about publishing is there's more work in it than just writing. And there are 3 ways to publish, but all 3 ways require a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of money. And so if you haven't published that book yet, the first thing I would tell you to do is get rid of the Starbucks addiction, and get rid of the Netflix, and get rid of the Hulu, and really start putting that money into a savings or an IRA or something where you can, because it takes a lot of money, and you want to have that money ready by the time you're ready to publish. And then the second thing is just, again, get rid of the Hulu and the television and the social media so you have time to focus on the research of not necessarily content and grammar and punctuation, all that, but more so marketing, advertising, and PR, because there was a time in history, hundreds of years ago, when someone did all that for you. But now, even if you hire someone and spend thousands upon thousands of dollars in marketing, they still want you to do a lot of the work. And so I would say do research on not just how to write a book, but the marketing and all of that, and the 3 different ways there are to publish. And then I always say, when you're making a decision, don't make a decision on, how much money you want to make, but write down the cons and the pros. If you are okay with the cons, then that's the decision you go with, because there's a bad side to self-publishing. There's a bad side to going with a small publisher, and there's a bad side going with a big publisher. And so you have to decide which bad side am I okay with the most, and then that's the one you decide.
Yeah, well, I don't have a lot to add to that. I think that's wise advice, Casey. And I think that at a more primary level for anyone is to discover what your voice is, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction or children's books. What's your unique voice? Like Casey says, it's your fingerprint. And I think that each of us has a unique voice. And that's part of, I think, the discovery process for us as writers is, what is our voice? What is the unique thing that we can speak and that we can bring forth, whether into the world, that would be valuable for others to learn and to hear?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there, the process of publishing, and I've been down both roads. My first book, The Healing Art of Storytelling, Hyperion published, it's a Disney imprint back in the 90s. And, it was a rude awakening for me. I was going to give a speech in San Francisco, and I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm going to be in San Francisco in March, and could we put something together? Maybe at Barnes and Noble there?" And they said, "Well, we don't have a budget for that." And I was, and Oprah had just come out with some book on diet or something, or exercise with her trainer, and they had $1 million budget for her. So I suddenly realized, it's on me,
It's
really.
on you.
Yeah, I somehow had the illusion that they were going to be doing everything they could to promote the book, but it was an awakening for me. But so whether you're self-publishing or whether you're going with a publisher, you still have the same challenge, because usually publishers are not going to do that much for you unless you're really at a top tier as an author. So it really becomes an incumbent upon you to figure out, how am I going to get the word out about my book? So, but the key, I think, though, for you as a writer is, is finding your voice. I was just at the chiropractor this afternoon, and the guy was working on me, and he's telling me that he's been writing about his father, who was a Holocaust survivor, who just died in December at age 95. And he was asking me about a particular website, about posting it up and everything. And so, we all have things to write. And maybe they don't all have to be published. It's a question. Is it worth publishing it? Is there an audience for this? Or maybe it's just something to be shared with our families. And that's always a question, because, but if you want to go down that road, if you feel the impulse to share it and you feel there's an audience, go and invest in that. Do as Casey said, put money aside, because you can't do it. It's not free. There's money involved in going to the market with your book, regardless. And there's a huge investment of time, so if you're writing, and then you're not earning money in other ways, or maybe you're getting up at 4 a.m. to write before you go to work, or you're doing it at night after work. So that's the thing that I would say to anyone who's aspiring to be a writer.
Okay. I think that's really good.
One last thing I'd add to that, if you remember the Jonathan Livingston Seagull, it was the best-selling book for a long time, and I think he was turned down by like 200 publishers. So you have to have faith in yourself. You have to have faith in your story. You have to not let what others are saying, dissuade you. Now, and at the same time, you have to be humble and be willing to get feedback, because maybe the book isn't ready. And that's it's how to discern that is really a difficult thing. So you have to be open to feedback, and that you also have to have faith in your work.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line between having your work and being definitely knowing what you have and what you know to be true to be your work, but then being open to correction and critique to say, okay, this can make it better. This is something that is will help my story be better. This will something that will move the story along or something. So you have to be open to the different comments that are being given to you, and just take it with a grain of salt. I have a note here from Mr. Sheldon. He says, I definitely enjoyed the different points made tonight. Oh, thank you, Mr. Sheldon. So we have comments coming in. So that is something that we have to be able to take advice. And you can't have I always tell, I host a writers group, and I always tell them, you can't have a thin skin when you're a writer, because there's always going to be someone who does not like what you have to say. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with it. You have to own your truth and be okay with someone saying, well, I didn't get that. You're like, it's okay. It's not for everybody. Your work is not for everybody. So that's something we have to get to as authors as well, like knowing that piece. So I have, we're coming down to the 10-minute mark, but I want to ask you really quickly. I know Casey works in a lot of genres, but we're dealing with nonfiction. But what other genres do you write in? These are the rapid questions now.
Children's, teen, young adult, nonfiction. I mean fiction. General fiction. So that's it at the moment.
Okay,
that's a lot.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Obviously nonfiction, but I've written children's books. I've written for television and film, and I've got some fictional projects I'm thinking about right now as well. So I like working in various media, but it requires a whole different headset. If you're working in fiction, it's a whole different kind of writing task than writing a nonfiction book, for example. So I enjoy all of those. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is pen, paper, or pen and paper or computer?
I mean, computer, only because I don't want to have to write it and then type it in. I'd rather just type it in all at once.
Yeah. Okay. I use a chisel and stone. It's editing is a little. It's really hard to edit with that thing, those guys. But if you have the right chisel, you can make change. No, I'm pretty much a computer guy. I went to computers in my advertising days when I used to run an ad agency back in the 80s. The IBM PC had just come out, and this is where you had floppy disk and all that kind of stuff. Oh yeah. But
I remember those.
once I realized that you could write something and you didn't have to retype it because you made changes, that was like, oh my gosh, my life changed and that business changed. So I write on a computer, and occasionally I'll pick up pen and paper sometimes when I'm journaling and doing other things, and that's its own kind of experience, to sit and just take a pen and paper and write. But it's computer for me most of the time.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a pen and paper. I start with a pen and paper, and it looks like a map when I write because there are arrows going all over the place to connect the stories, and little stars and up here and plus signs. And if you try to read my story at that point, you're like, what is she saying? It's not for you at that point.
Well, I do that on a computer. I use mind maps often as I'm in my early planning stages.
Okay.
So, and a mind map is sort of, it's like it's a visual, and but it's a computer. They've got wonderful programs for that. There's tons of them, and so when I'm early stage with, I don't just sit down and just start writing. I do a lot of organizing with those visual maps, and then moving things around, and then trying to figure out which comes first. that I think that's crucial to be really
Yes.
successful. But, some people can just sit down and start writing, and then they just go and they let the characters kind of evolve, and that's a way of doing it. And I know people do that successfully, but I think for me, I need to have a little bit of a roadmap of where I'm going.
Okay. Okay. And before we're talking about your 4 keys to success and story intelligence, but are you working on any other projects right now?
Technically, no. I just completed last week publishing my 9-book series, children book series, American History. It was a lot. It was supposed to be published
tired.
last. Huh?
I said I just felt tired listening to the 9 books.
Yes. It was, well, it started out as 1 book, and that was all I had intentions of doing. The first book was called American History, Americans of African Descent. And I did that for my nephews and nieces, and it wasn't really supposed to be published for the public. I only did it for them. And then I said, but I didn't think the research would take so long. And so because the research took so long, and then the illustrating the book and putting the book together, it was so much work. I said, I'm not going to just give it to them. I'm going to keep it open because it was so much work. And so then I said, well, I might as well keep going. And so it's a 9-book series: Hispanic, Asian, European, Australian, Middle Eastern, Native Indian, North, Central, South American. I wanted to make sure every child was represented so that they can see themselves, so that they themselves can realize you can be an innovator and an inventor as well. And I've also just completed a short, what happened was 2020, because I had nothing to do. I decided for the first time in my life, because I've always heard that as a writer, you should be constantly submitting to journals and magazines and contests and competitions. But the problem with that is most times they want original work, not stuff you've already published. And I didn't have any. So 2020 was my first year of creating original work for all of these publications. And I created almost, I think, 10 or 11 poems and short stories. And each and every one of them was rejected. So I was like, that's a lot of work. And so I said, maybe I should put them all in a book, and the book is going to be called Rejected. And so each email was like, thank you so much for your contribution. However, we don't want you. And so it was just like,
I don't think you should call it however. I think you should call it however, not rejected. However, regardless of what. However, I still have my book.
Right.
So,
that one. And this one will be my first time reaching out to I hate to use the word small because it makes it seem, but I'll say an independent publishing company. This will be my first time doing that, only because I just want to know what it feels like, the experience. I've heard a lot about it, but for myself, I want to know and feel the experience. So this book will be going through an independent publisher.
Cool. Just real quickly, it's interesting, the rejection thing. That's like, if you're going to be a writer, you be prepared to be rejected often. Right now, we're just getting ready to launch Story Intelligence. It doesn't hit the bookshelves until mid-March. So I've got a lot of energy around that. But I'm also working on some video kinds of projects. I'm actually working on an idea for a television show that's based on story, the power of story. And so that's an early project. And I'm working with some other folks on a jazz show, on a TV jazz show. So we're in the middle of that. So writing can take other forms, and writing for television, and so I've got my fingers in a few pies that way. But we have some ideas for additional books. One of the things, if you blog, if you journal, blogging's great, because at some point you got so many blogs, you can collate those into a book. So
yes.
I'm looking at taking a lot of the blogs and turning them into, that may be a follow-up book on Story Intelligence after this new one comes out.
Yeah, there's someone who did that actually. And before we go, because we've been talking about your books and we want to let people know where we can find them. So Richard, can you let us know where we can find your book?
Well, right there, storyintelligence.com. If you go to storyintelligence.com, you can you can subscribe to the newsletter, and we'll let you know once the book hits Amazon and the bookshelves.
And I see you're also on Twitter, Storyworking INTL or
Yeah.
International. Well, I don't want
Yeah.
to spell that out because you have to
Yeah.
say the word. And on
Yeah.
Facebook, Storywork International.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
you can also connect with him via email.
Yep. Please write me, stone@storywork.com.
Excellent. And Casey?
Yeah, so authorcaseybell.com. You can find all my books, and the social media and email is there. But actually, if you go to authorcaseybell.com, if you click on social media, you'll see all my social media. And if you click on contact me, you'll be able to contact me.
Okay, excellent. I just want to thank our authors for being here. We are at our 1 hour mark, but this was such a wonderful dialogue with you. I really appreciate you coming on to the show. And we had some really great questions and comments from our audience here. So we just want to thank you and we wish you all your best with your project, Story Intelligence. And when you have your new projects coming on, definitely come back and share it with us, because we're excited to let everybody know what's going on. And for those people who are, if you want to learn a little bit more about who we are and what we do, or we're at iabx.org. Let me just give you our website. Our website is iabx.org. If you are interested in being a part of the show, The Author Speaks, we feature every month. Each month we have a different genre. Next month we'll be doing biographies and memoirs, and that's on February 17th. And if you are a science fiction writer, March 17th. So definitely go to our website at iabx.org to sign up and to be a part of our programming. We really appreciate Richard and Casey. Richard tuning in with the wonders of social media and technology, all the way from Georgia, and Casey all the way from New Jersey. So I just want to thank them for being here. We just want to, and I'm remiss if I do not say this. I wanted to acknowledge Miss Amanda Gorman. I don't know if you guys saw the inauguration today.
Terrific. She was
a poet. Yes, this 22-year-old poet who is amazing. Amazing. So we want, from IABX to Miss Amanda, we want to say congratulations. You did a really wonderful job. And if you are listening to our program and anyone knows, please stop by and chat with us here at IABX. We would love to have you. So thank you, gentlemen. We're still in the COVID era, so we want to say be safe, do social distancing, wash your hands, be safe, take care, and be well.
good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.